the Russian army, I doubt, is particularly well equipped to cope with savage, cold winters in Ukraine. So that it will be a double-edged sword.
NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg met the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in Downing Street today and welcomed the UK's support for Ukraine.
The United Kingdom plays a key role in leading our efforts in providing support to Ukraine. The United Kingdom have done that for many years, trained close to 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers, stepped up after invasion, and the message is that we need to continue to support Ukraine. If President Putin wins in Ukraine, it will be disastrous for Ukrainians, but it also make us more vulnerable, because then the message to President Putin, to other authoritarian leaders, will be that they can get their way, achieve their goals by using brutal military force.
Well, let's get more on all this from Lord Robathan, a former Defence and Armed Forces Minister and a Conservative peer. Good evening to you, Lord Robathan.
Good evening, Carol.
What do you make, first of all, of this announcement from Russia that it's pulling its forces out of Kherson? How significant is that?
Well, I think it's hugely encouraging. I think one should always be cautious when dealing with an enemy, and I would view Russia now as an enemy, because it may be a feint. Perhaps they've left behind huge mines. I don't know. And I think the Ukrainians are very wise to this. After all, the Ukrainian strategy has been over the last couple of months to destroy the supply routes across the Dnipro River, so that what has happened, namely that the Russians have been starved of supplies. At least that appears to be what happened from London. And personally, I'm very encouraged, but I think always be cautious, especially with a dangerous enemy like Russia.
Yes, and that is clearly why Ukraine is being cautious in its response to this, waiting to see the retreat. But as we were hearing from Andrei Zagorodnyuk there, they've already pulled quite a lot of their equipment and so on out of the city. And strategically, it would be pretty significant were Ukrainian forces to recapture the city.
Yes, indeed. Of course, what appears to be the idea is that Russia is intending to dig in and produce defences on the other side of the Dnipro River, on the eastern side, which will then be more difficult to take. Certainly, frontally, it would be very difficult to take. But no, I'm hugely encouraged. I think what it does show is how important it is that NATO, and the UK has been leading on this very well, continues to keep the munitions and explosives and missiles flowing to Ukraine, because actually Ukraine is in a pretty difficult position with power and everything like that, and we must continue to help them.
Yeah, because even though the Russians may be about to perform a tactical retreat from Kherson, as we've been seeing, they continue to pound power stations and so on across the country, making life miserable for many Ukrainians. And in particular, air defences that Andrei was talking about there, those are still desperately needed.
Yes, indeed, that's what it appears to be the case. And we have been, I applaud the British government for over the last eight months sending a huge amount of munitions to the Ukrainians. I understand the EU is way behind. I read in the Times actually today. We must keep up this flow of munitions. We must keep up the flow of missiles and air defences, which is what they're particularly short of. And you're quite right. The power shortages are going to make life incredibly difficult over the winter for the Ukrainians. However, I would say that the Russian army, I doubt, is particularly well equipped to cope with savage, cold winters in Ukraine. So that it will be a double-edged sword, if I can put it that way.
And how concerned are you about this notion of war fatigue, perhaps not in the UK, but across parts of Europe that you've already mentioned? We know that Republicans who may not have made the gains they would have liked in the United States, but some Republican voices are concerned about the amount of money that the United States is spending on sending munitions to Ukraine. Are you concerned that the commitment to help the Ukrainians withstand this Russian onslaught could wane?
I am concerned. I think it's pretty strong in the United Kingdom, but certainly, I mean, we've heard many Republican politicians in the States saying they think they should stop sending all this stuff to Ukraine. Um, Isolationism, one needs to know the history of isolationism in the 1930s and what that led to. And it took a hell of a lot of action, and it took Pearl Harbor, essentially, to shift Americans away from isolationism. America remains such a huge country, such a huge military country, that we must keep them on side. I think, to be fair to Joe Biden, which I'm not always, I think he's been pretty straight on this, so that's good. And to try to withdraw, to pull the rug out, if you like, from underneath the Ukrainians would be a disaster. And it's not just, although the war is taking place in Ukraine, this is not just a threat to Ukraine. This is a threat to continuing world peace and the world order, and that is a threat to Europe, if not to America.
Rishi Sunak is not a politician who's had military experience or any experience in the Ministry of Defence. Are you confident that his commitment to help Ukraine is going to be the same as those of, I was going to say his predecessor, but one, of course, Boris Johnson, who formed a very strong bond with President Zelensky?
I don't know what Rishi Sunak thinks. He's a new prime minister. I think what we should all bear in mind is that this war in Europe has been going on for 8 months. There are people, as we speak, being killed in Europe by Russians, and of course Russians by Ukrainians. This is the most shocking event of our lives, frankly. Certainly it's the most dangerous moment of our lives since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Putin has nuclear weapons, God willing, and I think it's probably likely he will not use them. But we need to be absolutely aware of the dangers to the whole of European and world peace. This war has been going for 8 months. We have been laudably, and I applaud the government, we have been sending huge amounts of munitions to Ukraine, which has replenished our own stocks of munitions, of missiles and anti-tank missiles. And we're not spending any more money to replace those, and we're not spending any more money on defense. And we must realize that the days of not paying the insurance premiums on defence are past. We need to pay those premiums, or the insurance policy will lapse, and we will not be able to defend ourselves properly in a very dangerous world.
Let me just ask you finally, we've seen Gavin Williamson resigning over allegations about comments he made to a Ministry of Defence official. I mean, what do you think of that behaviour? Do you think it was a mistake for Rishi Sunak to bring him back into the government in the first place?
I don't know the details except what I've read in the newspapers, and I don't know what Rishi was, the Prime Minister, was thinking at the time, but I think a lot of new details have been released. I think if it is true he told a senior minister or any Ministry of Defence official to go and cut his throat, that is actually disgraceful. I think we can all agree on that. And it is not how any minister or any body, actually, any person should behave. I can be pretty robust with my language. You may know this, Carol, but I would never dream of telling an official, indeed anybody in whom I was a position or authority over, I would never dream of telling anybody to go and cut their throat. And it's quite shocking. I would also say, though, if I can divert this slightly, there is a campaign to discredit some of Rishi Sunak's appointments. He's only been Prime Minister, a couple of weeks. And of course, not everybody's going to be perfect. And let's leave Gavin Williamson out of it. But people are trying to undermine the Prime Minister by using things like this. And look, he was Prime Minister almost by surprise when Liz Truss resigned. And he will not have had a lot of time to plan his cabinet. And therefore, I think one should give the Prime Minister a chance.
Lord Robathan, great to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.